It is officially draft season. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews, where I'm your host, John Delray, for this Friday night mock draft. Yes, mock draft number 1 this year. Of course, this one taking place before the combine, before free agency. We're a bit early for this to happen yet, but nonetheless, let's do our first mock draft. And I have just a couple things to say before we totally dive in here. A few ground rules, shall we say. Number 1, I'm utilizing PFF's mock draft simulator, or I did already in this case, to build this mock draft. I kept the settings predominantly on their default, and I'm going to be sticking to, as well, the Packers methodology. So choosing young, projecting guys to be hyper athletic, going with very valuable positions, especially in round 1, then kind of deviating from that a little bit farther back. But ultimately, what I'm doing is going to be using their methodology to make the picks that I personally would make, looking over their team needs and, generally speaking, what they do. In this mock draft, I'm also going to be covering the first 5 picks of the draft. In other words, the 5 top 100 selections that the Packers have this year. And as I mentioned, just keep in mind, this mock draft, as all mock drafts are right now, are still relatively underinformed. Because we all know RAS is very, very important to the Packers. The combine and the athletic testing there, very, very important to the Packers. As I've been saying for weeks, the Packers have some of the strictest athletic thresholds in the entire NFL. They stick to them hard. And that dates all the way back to Ron Wolf, then to Thompson, then, of course, to Brian Gutekunst. But keep in mind, last year at this time, we were all constantly mocking Brian Branch to the Packers. The Packers need to say Brian Branch to the Packers. And then he did the combine. And then there was no way in hell that Brian Branch was going to be going to the Packers because his numbers just fell short of what their athletic thresholds are. So there you have it. So in some cases, this is a practice in the underinformed. But nonetheless, based upon what we do know, we can at least start seeing how the board may fall, start positioning some things. So without further ado, let's dive in. So with the 25th pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, the Green Bay Packers select with their first selection, this would be cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry. 6'1", 195 pounds, meaning both of the Packers thresholds, and only 21 years old. McKinstry is regarded as one of the best coverage cornerbacks in this draft. What's interesting is when you look up different profiles of McKinstry, some people consider him to be a press man corner. Others see him excelling basically as off ball, perhaps doing even better in zone than he does in man, as is the case with PFF. So, and what's neat is like the differentiation doesn't happen because he can't do anything. Like you see that a lot, like generally scattered opinions of the draft community are because like the guy can't do a whole lot. But here it's because he actually can do both. He's a very strong tackler with a career high missed tackle percentage of only 10%. So he's a physical corner who could fit right into what the Packers are aiming to do. Pair that with being regarded as an expert communicator in Nick Saban's complex secondary, and he does show a lot of the traits that Green Bay could be looking for. Now, in case you're wondering, already off the board here were a number of other cornerbacks, including Quinnen Mitchell, including DeJean from Iowa. So this was what I felt to be the best situation left at the cornerback position, and certainly someone who fits the mold of what the Packers could be looking for. Now, moving on to the second round with pick 41, the Green Bay Packers pick Kingsley Suamataia, tackle from BYU. Look, man, this guy's big, real big, 6'6" and 318 pounds. And he's fast, which those two things don't feel like they go together, but in this case, they do. He's legitimately fast, clocking in at over 20 miles an hour using GPS tracking. And he's only 21. He does need some refinement, but after checking in at number 3 on Bruce Feldman's freak list, of which case, if you're not familiar with the freak list, I would go look it up. Bruce Feldman every single year comes out with basically who is he expecting to be the absolute athletic freaks. And here you go. Here's number 3. Given that upside, he may just prove to be too much for the Packers to pass up, given their holes on the offensive line. Over his last 2 years at BYU, he has started 22 times. In 2022, he was their starting right tackle. he never gave up a sack. In 2023, he switched to the left tackle, and in the early part of the year, he did struggle with the change before settling in and becoming one of the better left tackles in the country before the end of the season. When assessing Kingsley, it's really, really easy to see a few things. His punch is powerful, and yet, despite his large frame, he's incredibly graceful on his feet, very light of foot. He shows good range. His size allows him to smother lighter defenders and, frankly, reach for them. And I think, there are some things here that still need development. He's not a finished product yet. He does have a tendency to want to use his size for what Bleacher Report scouting refers to as kill shots, which leads to the occasional miss. It's also noted in several different scouting reports that his processing and diagnosing of defenses still could use some development that very well might naturally happen the more he plays, given that he still is only 21. And really the thing here is, because now you got your corner in round 1, you're sitting here with your tackle in round 2, and this is not like what the Packers generally do, right? Normally they pick guys who are tackle versus guard switchable. They want their guys to be versatile in the offensive line. Kingsley, he's more than likely a tackle through and through, depending on how all of his measurables come in. But given the Packers' offensive line situation, you've got the unknown that is David Bakhtiari. Whether they're going to keep him on the roster or not remains to be seen. We also know that the Packers want their best 5 on the field. Matt LaFleur, that's his anthem, the best 5. So is it possible that by adding Kingsley into the mix that then they kick Zach Tom inside? I don't know as if I personally love that idea because Zach Tom proved so invaluable at right tackle. But at the very least, Kingsley gives you a swing tackle in the immediacy right now, while possibly offering the highest ceiling of every single offensive lineman on the team, maybe even above Zach Tom, which I know is kind of blasphemy. It's a large, large statement, and I hope it didn't sound over-exaggerating, but it's the truth. By the way, BYU also runs a ton of RPO, so he should be fairly experienced in what the Packers like to run. Now, taking a look in round 2, their later selection, this would be pick 57, and frankly, I was thrilled that he was still there. That's safety from Minnesota, Tyler Nubin, 22 years old. He spent 5 years in school. So Nubin is a little bit more experienced, just a touch older than how the Packers generally like to pick players in their top 100 picks. But just couldn't pass this up. Cameron Kitchens, the safety from Miami, he was already off the board. And so I'm sitting here at 57 thinking, okay, like we got our corner. We got offensive line reinforcement. At the very least, we got way better flexibility and upside on the offensive line. Safety is a big old gaping hole, and we need it. Oh, there's Tyler Nubin. He boasts a missed tackle percent of under 12 the last 2 years. He's also amassed 9 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, and 33 stops, all while allowing a completion percentage under 35%. New defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley may also really like his versatility. Just last year at Minnesota alone, Nubin had 198 snaps in the box, 468 as the free safety, and 84 in the slot. And while he may not be a deep center fielder, because one of the concerns about Nubin is, does he really have top-end speed? So, okay, he's probably not going to be their new center fielder in this new style of defense, but he very much could play in the box. Very well could even be slot, or keep in mind that wrinkle that Hafley may be introducing in terms of the Viper position, a hybrid linebacker safety. Simply put, given his stats, given his propensity, given his swag on the field, Nubin is a disruptor. And that's something that the Packers need in their secondary. The biggest question for me isn't whether Nubin can truly be a success in the NFL. I think just watching him, you kind of get the idea that he can. But the question really is, how is he going to test? Because that is probably the biggest concern with Nubin, is does he have that speed? Does he have that close agility? We just don't know really until he gets to the combine and does the testing. Is this Brian Branch all over again? I hope not, because I frankly would really like to see Nubin in a Packer uniform. Moving on to round 3. Packers have 2 more selections in this mock draft. By the way, if you're curious about a mock draft where I go through all 7 rounds, yeah, that'll be coming eventually. If you're curious about a mock draft where they trade up or trade down, that could very well be coming next week. So let's move on to round 3. And I'm just going to say this now. Okay. I know I said at the top, we're going to use the Packers' tendencies to inform decisions, right? I do not have a lot of faith that this pick would be chosen by the Green Bay Packers, but I felt the need to do it, given his value, given the ceiling. But I'll be the first to admit there's a lot of concern here. So let's get right to it. That would be linebacker Peyton Wilson from NC State. Okay. The injury history, very concerning. He's torn his ACL twice, really coming into college. He also missed a large chunk of one of his underclassmen season to a shoulder injury. He's also almost 24 years old. You hear all of that, and I know you might be a little snide thinking like, well, an injured player, he's going to fit right in with Green Bay. Yeah, I get it. Okay, but almost 24 years old, that doesn't sound like something that Goot is going to pick. But the third round is historically where Gutekunst gets the most flexible with his thresholds. And I understand fully that this would be no exception. But, and this is a big but, Draft Network calls him one of the best watches of this entire draft class. In 2023 alone, he logged 138 tackles, 17.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 3 interceptions, a pick six, 6 pass deflections, 2 fumble recoveries, and a forced fumble. Plus, add on, according to PFF's tracking, 67 stops and a missed tackle rate of under 5%. All in 1 year. The knocks beyond the obvious injury history is he does have a tendency to at times play overly aggressive, as well as there's some legitimate concern out there beyond his body of just about whether he can keep on adding strength, because there is some concern about whether he's strong enough to take on more physical play in the NFL. But there are several reports out there saying that if it weren't for the injury history, we are talking about him dramatically higher in this draft. Or even, as one scouting report referred to him as a slam dunk #1 off-ball linebacker this year. Pro Football Network even refers to him as a mosquito, always around the ball. And they mentioned that if he's going to add weight to his frame, the sky is the limit. And plus, yes, he's got one incident from when he was 19. He used a fake ID, he got drunk, that whole deal. But beyond that, you've got a guy who's shown he just wants to play football. He's battled back from injury after injury. He's got all these stats. I got to tell you, I think the ceiling is so high for Peyton Wilson. And the fact that he's a little bit older doesn't bother me. They're going to be moving to a new defense. If they move on from Campbell, they need more off-ball linebackers. Even if they don't move on from Campbell, they need more off-ball linebackers. And I get the concerns. I get some of you may hate this. I understand it fully. It's just, given where you are in the third round, it feels like it's time to take a chance on someone who could be a difference maker for the defense. And then that takes us to our final pick of the night. Pick 91. In the third round, we're going with Marshawn Kneeland. He is one of the best edge run defenders in this draft. 6'3", 275 pounds. By George, that's Goot's music, because he likes his edges big, and this guy fits the bill. He's kind of reminiscent from like a size standpoint and what he does well of like a Preston Smith. He's a power rusher. He loves to overwhelm offensive tackles with pure strength, and he uses that strength then in the run game to actually set an effective edge. In terms of pass rush, he did have a productive senior season at Western Michigan. He did have 6 sacks, 30 pressures, thereabouts. But it's apparent that much of that production wasn't done because he is like the top of the draft, some freak athlete. Nah, this dude's strong and he's big. And that still could be mighty useful for the Green Bay Packers. Edge is always a need in the first place. And now you've got Kingsley Enagbare likely missing most of this coming season with his ACL tear. I wouldn't be shocked at all if the Packers look to go in the direction of another 4-3 end. And Kneeland may even be more effective as a 4-3 end than he is as a stand-up 3-4 edge. 87% of his career snaps at Western Michigan occurred outside of the tackle. Exactly where Green Bay's new 4-3 ends might very well be lining up regularly. So that's it. That's the top 5 picks. We got Kool-Aid McKinstry. Then we've got Kingsley. I'm going to stick with that for now. Tyler Newman, Peyton Wilson, and then lastly, Marshawn Nealand. And I know that does put the Packers in not addressing every single need, right? But they did get some real things accounted for there. And I'll be the first to tell you, is this their ideal draft? Probably not. But I think if they were to take this haul, you're looking at really reinforcing parts of the defense, as well as potentially one of your weaker components on offense. The biggest needs to this point is probably still some kind of center field safety. And I think it's safe to say heading into draft season that one of the safety positions, be it box or free safety, certainly the slot, there are going to have to be some kind of free agent infusion. They cannot solve all of this just from the draft. If they can solve one with someone like a Tyler Newman, then they're in fairly decent shape if the rest is supplemented. So I wouldn't expect that all of these picks are going to plug every single hole. And then I know you're probably also looking at running back, another concern, because what are they doing with A.J. Dillon? Aaron Jones isn't getting any younger, right? But given the way that the board fell, I was realistically looking in the third round at potentially Braylon Allen from Wisconsin or Marshawn Lloyd from USC. And I felt like the difference between third round backs and fourth round backs just isn't really enough to justify leapfrogging some other player that I felt could have a more important spot in a rotation or someone who's less replaceable. So running back would certainly be addressed pretty quickly thereafter. But I did feel as though these picks do a good job addressing, especially at the top, youth, ceiling, and athleticism. Now, we'll see how the combine changes all of that. And like I said, if you're interested in a mock draft that's going to feature trades and all that kind of stuff, be on the lookout for that next week. But for now, that is our first mock draft because, as I said in the beginning, we are officially in mock draft season. Thanks so much for joining me here on Lombardi Time Brews. I do hope you have a fantastic weekend. I'll be seeing you on Monday. And as always, go Pack, go.